The twin sons of Zara seared the crimson dunes of the Korath wastes, baking the air into a shimmering haze that made distant explosions ripple like mirages. Dust coated everything, rifles, rations, the inside of your throat. Among the weary humans slogging through the aftermath of the Third Sandbreaker offensive was Joran Vale, a former sergeant whose service record was thick with commendations and thinner with friends. He'd left the military 2 years ago, not because he'd lost his nerve, but because he'd run out of reasons to keep pulling the trigger. Now he worked salvage runs, scavenging wrecked alien mechs and dead tech for credits that barely covered synth meal and a cot in a prefab dorm. But today, the Interstellar Accord had dragged him back into uniform for one last ceremonial duty, accepting a symbol of unity on behalf of all human survivors of the campaign. Joran stood in the makeshift parade ground, boots sinking slightly in the hot sand, his fatigue stiff with dried sweat and ash. Around him, battered troops formed crooked lines, some leaning on crutches, others blinking against the glare with vacant eyes. At the dais, a repurposed hoverlift draped in the violet and silver banners of the Varelian hegemony, stood General Talaris, scales gleaming beneath his ceremonial armor, flanked by a dozen honor guards whose rifles hummed with contained plasma. Then came the moment Joran had been dreading. A slender figure stepped forward, cloaked in a dusty traveler's shawl that obscured most of her features. Her skin, where visible, was the deep violet of twilight shadows, and a cascade of white hair spilled past her shoulders like frozen starlight. She moved with a quiet grace that seemed out of place amid all the clanking metal and shouting officers. "This is Lyra," announced Talaris, voice booming through a translator. "She is a Varelian war bride, gifted in gratitude to the bravest human warrior present. She has chosen you, Joran Vale, by ancient right of honor." Joran blinked. A war bride. He glanced around, half expecting someone to laugh and reveal the prank. But no one did. Lyra lowered her hood, revealing luminous silver eyes that held galaxies of unreadable emotion. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just stared at him with unnerving intensity. He opened his mouth to protest, but the general clapped him on the shoulder so hard his teeth rattled. "Consider it a diplomatic marriage," Talaris said, lowering his voice. "Refusing would be unwise." So Joran accepted, with a stiff nod and a dry throat. As the ceremony wrapped up, Lyra fell into step beside him without a word. She carried a small satchel and wore practical desert boots beneath her flowing robes. He expected her to speak, to ask questions, to demand explanations, but she remained silent, watching the horizon with the calm of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. Back at the refugee outpost, a cluster of inflatable tents and rusted cargo haulers, Joran found his assigned quarters had been upgraded to a double unit. Lyra walked in like she owned the place, set her satchel down, and began unrolling a sleeping mat in the corner farthest from his cot. "You don't have to stay here," Joran finally said, rubbing his temples. "I didn't ask for this. Nobody asked you either." She paused, then turned. "In Varelian tradition, war brides are not forced," she said, her voice soft but clear, like wind through crystal chimes. "We choose, and I chose you." "Why me?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "Because you carried wounded Varelian scouts 3 clicks through shelling to get them to medics," she said. "Because you refused to raise a civilian sandhut cluster even when ordered. Because you still wear your old unit patch, faded as it is. You fight, but you don't hate." Joran flushed. He hadn't thought anyone had noticed those things. "Those were just normal things," he muttered. "To us, they are rare," she replied, and that was the end of that conversation. Days passed in uneasy cohabitation. Joran returned to his salvage runs by day, crawling through downed war machines under the merciless sun. Lyra, meanwhile, began helping at the field hospital, her knowledge of alien anatomy startling the human medics. She stitched plasma burns with needle-thin precision, brewed herbal poultices that smelled like ozone and mint, and calmed screaming children with songs in a language that seemed to harmonize with the wind itself. Rumors spread quickly. The human veteran had won himself a healer warrior, a woman who could read a man's pain just by the way he breathed. One evening, after a particularly grueling day hauling reactor cores out of a half-buried dropship, Joran returned to find their quarters spotless and a pot of spiced root stew simmering over a portable heat coil. He stared at it like it might explode. "You cook?" he asked. "I adapt," she said simply, handing him a bowl. He ate in silence. Then, surprising himself, said, "Thanks." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the old scar running down his forearm. a souvenir from a Varelian blade during the early skirmishes of the war. That was my people's weapon, she said quietly. I know, he said, not looking up. I never held it against you. Lyra's expression softened. Just a fraction. Most humans would. Most humans haven't spent 2 years wondering if they'll ever stop dreaming about burning cities, he replied. A strange thing began to happen. Their silence became comfortable. They stopped tiptoeing around each other and started sharing chores. Joran patching the tent's air filter. Lyra mending his torn jacket with thread spun from desert spider silk. One night, during a sudden sandstorm that rattled the walls like a beast trying to get in, Joran woke to find Lyra trembling in her corner. Not from fear of the storm, but from nightmares of her own. Without thinking, he tossed her his spare thermal blanket. She looked at him with wide eyes, then wrapped herself in it like it was something sacred. You remind me of my brother, she whispered. He was gentle too, before the war took him. Joran didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. But something shifted that night. Trust, fragile as a glass bubble, had formed between them. Then came the raid. It happened at dawn. Scavenger gangs, humans and rogue aliens alike, had been circling the outpost for weeks, waiting for the Accord forces to thin out. When they struck, it was with fire and fury. Plasma grenades tore through supply tents, screams filled the air, and chaos erupted. Joran, half asleep, grabbed his pulse rifle and bolted outside. He saw Lyra already in motion, not fleeing but fighting, dodging blasts with unnatural speed, using a salvaged shock baton to disable attackers with precise strikes to nerve clusters. But one brute, a hulking mercenary with cybernetic claws, got the drop on her, pinning her against a wrecked transport. Joran didn't think. He charged. What followed wasn't skill, but sheer stubborn rage. He took a claw swipe to the ribs that made him see stars, but he kept moving, driving the mercenary back with wild, desperate shots. Lyra, freed, snatched a fallen plasma pistol and fired a single, searing bolt that vaporized the attacker's weapon arm. The mercenary howled and fled into the dunes. Panting, bleeding, Joran slumped against the transport. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands glowing faintly violet as she pressed them to his wound. Warmth spread through his side, the pain dulling instantly. You didn't have to do that, she said, voice tight. You're stuck with me now, he grunted, trying to smile. Might as well keep you alive. She almost laughed. Almost. But her eyes shimmered with something deeper than gratitude. Later, in the med tent, while a human doctor patched him up properly, Lyra sat vigil. When the doctor left, she leaned close. There's something I must tell you, she whispered. Joran braced himself. Was she married? Cursed? Carrying some alien plague? But before she could speak, a Varelian honor guard arrived. Not the usual soldiers, but elite palace sentinels in ornate armor, their insignias gleaming with royal sigils. They bowed deeply to Lyra. Your Highness, their captain said. The regent's fleet has arrived. The coup has been quelled. You are safe to return. Joran's blood ran cold. Your Highness. Lyra looked at him, guilt and sorrow warring in her eyes. I am Princess Lyr Visara of the Varelian hegemony, she confessed. Third in line to the Star Throne. During the Civil War, I was sent undercover among the common soldiers to avoid assassination. I never meant to deceive you, but I couldn't reveal my identity, not even after I chose you. Joran sat there, stunned. He'd won a princess as a medal, a literal royal. He should have been furious, used, made a fool of, but all he felt was a strange ache in his chest. So all this time, you were slumming it with a washed-up human grunt? No, she said fiercely. I was living. For the first time in my life, I wasn't highness or heir. I was just Lyra. And you saw me, not my title, not my bloodline. Just me. Before Joran could respond, the royal shuttle descended, sleek and silent as a ghost. The captain gestured for Lyra to board. She hesitated, looking back at Joran. You don't belong in my world, she said softly. And you don't belong in this dust bowl, he shot back. A pause. Then, with sudden determination, she turned to the captain. He comes with me. The captain's antennae twitched in alarm. Your Highness, a human? In the royal court? The council will never allow. They'll allow what I permit, she said. Her voice now carrying the steel of command Joran had never heard before. And just like that, Joran found himself aboard a star-faring vessel bound for the Varelian capital. A crystalline city floating above a gas giant, its towers spiraling into the clouds like living sculptures. He wore borrowed robes that felt absurdly soft, while Lyra, now dressed in flowing silks and a circlet of star metal, walked beside him like she owned the stars themselves. The court was everything Joran feared. Cold, judgmental, steeped in ancient protocol. Nobles whispered behind jeweled hands, their violet faces twisted in disdain at the mud-born human in their midst. But Lyra never left his side. At formal dinners, she ensured he understood the customs. At strategy meetings, which she insisted he attend, citing his tactical insight, she defended his ideas against skeptical generals. Slowly, grudgingly, a few began to respect him, not for who he married, but for who he was. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city's luminous bridges, Lyra turned to him. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Being dragged into all this?" Joran thought of the desert, the endless red, the silence, the loneliness. Then he thought of her laughter, rare but bright, the way she hummed while cooking, how she'd once punched a noble who'd insulted his people. "Nah," he said. "Deserts are quiet. Palaces are loud. But you're worth the noise." She smiled then, a real, unguarded smile, and took his hand. But peace, as always, was fragile. Word came from the frontier. Remnants of the rebel faction had regrouped, this time with stolen bioweapons capable of targeting Varelian DNA. Worse, they'd broadcast a threat, deliver the human consort to them, or they'd unleash the plague on civilian worlds. Lyra was furious. "They think you're my weakness," she hissed. "They don't understand you're my strength." Joran, however, saw an opportunity. "Let them think I'm the bait," he said. "We set a trap." The plan was audacious. Joran would defect, offering himself in exchange for the weapon's location. Lyra and her fleet would follow at a distance, cloaked. It was dangerous, stupid, and probably insane, but it was also the only way to end this without more bloodshed. The drop zone was a derelict asteroid station, its corridors dark and humming with failing life support. Joran walked in alone, hands raised. The rebel leader, a scarred warlord named Vrax, smirked as his guards seized Joran. "Cute trick," Vrax sneered. "But your princess won't save you here." "I'm not here for saving," Joran said. "I'm here to finish this." At that moment, lights flared. Royal Marines rappelled from the ceiling. Lyra, clad in battle armor, strode in like vengeance made flesh. But Vrax had one last surprise. A neural detonator linked to his heartbeat. "Kill me, and this whole station goes with us," he gloated. Joran didn't hesitate. He headbutt Vrax, grabbed the detonator, and hurled it down a ventilation shaft. Then he tackled the warlord as the Marines opened fire. The explosion rocked the station, but it was contained, distant. Vrax lay dead. The weapon schematics were recovered. Back on the capital world, Joran was hailed as a hero. But more importantly, the council finally saw what Lyra had known all along. This human wasn't a prize or a pawn. He was a partner. Months turned into a year. Joran learned the language, adopted a few customs, though he still preferred coffee to nectar tea, and even taught palace guards some human hand-to-hand tricks. Lyra, in turn, relaxed the rigid protocols of court, opening shelters for war orphans and pushing for human Varelian cultural exchanges. One quiet evening, as they walked through the royal gardens, where bioluminescent flowers bloomed in sync with the twin moons, Lyra stopped and faced him. "You never asked," she said. "Asked what?" "If I'd stay. If we'd build something real." Joran took her hands. They were warm, strong, familiar. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." "I'm ready now," she said. "Marry me, not as a war bride, not as a princess and a soldier, just as." He kissed her then, under alien stars that now felt like home. And though their path wouldn't be easy, prejudice lingered, wars simmered on distant fronts, and the weight of crowns was heavy, they faced it together. For Joran had won more than a medal that day in the desert. He'd won a future. And Lyra, in choosing a human who saw her soul and not her station, had found not just a husband, but a true equal. Their story was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, it was heading toward something brighter than survival. Toward peace, toward family, toward love that crossed galaxies, not just sand dunes. Peace, as Joran had learned too many times, was never a destination. It was a temporary shelter between storms. The royal wedding had been a spectacle of light and song, broadcast across 50 star systems. A human in tailored indigo robes standing beside a violet-skinned princess beneath a canopy woven from living star vines. Thousands cheered. Millions watched. But in the shadows of that joy, old hatred stirred. 6 months later, Lyra missed her cycle. At first, she said nothing, attributing the fatigue to state duties. But when nausea struck during a diplomatic summit with the methane-breathing Krell, Joran noticed. He'd seen that look before, on his sister years ago back on Earth before the evacuation orders came. He waited until they were alone in their chambers, the city lights twinkling below like scattered jewels, and asked gently. Her hands trembled as she placed them on her abdomen. "It's impossible," she whispered. "Our species, we've never produced viable offspring. The genetic chasm is too wide. Scholars have tried for centuries. But the med scanners didn't lie. Within her, a heartbeat pulsed. Faint, but unmistakably alive. Not fully human, not fully Varelian, but something new. A bridge. The news spread like wildfire through the palace. Jubilation erupted among the younger generation, proof that unity wasn't just political but biological. But in the High Council chambers, the mood was glacial. Elder Lord Zorvak, a traditionalist whose lineage traced back to the Purge Wars, slammed his obsidian staff on the floor. "This abomination threatens the purity of the Varelian bloodline," he declared. "It must not be born." Lyra, now visibly with child, refused to back down. "This child is my heir," she announced in open court. "And Joran's. And if you challenge it, you challenge me." Tensions escalated. Saboteurs struck the capital's orbital nurseries. Anonymous threats arrived in encrypted datapods. And then came the worst blow. A hidden clause in the ancient Accord of Coexistence was unearthed, one that forbade interspecies procreation among royal lines, under penalty of exile. Zorvak moved swiftly. Citing the clause, he petitioned the Star Tribunal to strip Lyra of her succession rights and banish Joran to the penal moons of Xylos, icy wastelands where nothing lived but radiation and regret. Joran expected Lyra to fight with speeches and scrolls. Instead, she vanished. For 3 days, panic gripped the palace. Counselors whispered treason. Joran paced their chambers like a caged beast, his mind racing through every desert hideout, every rebel contact, every possible scenario. On the 4th dawn, a coded message arrived, not from Lyra, but from a long-forgotten ally, General Talaris, now retired and living in the dune-carved monasteries of Korath. "She's here," the message read. "Come alone. Bring your rifle." Joran didn't hesitate. He stole a cloaked skiff, flew through a meteor belt to avoid detection, and landed in the rust-red wastes where it all began. There, in a cave lined with ancient Varelian glyphs, he found Lyra, not hiding but planning. "I didn't run," she said, one hand resting on her swelling belly, the other holding a data crystal. "I went hunting." The crystal contained evidence. Zorvak had orchestrated the entire crisis. He'd funded the rebel bioweapon plot, forged the rediscovered Accord Clause, and even hired the saboteurs to frame Joran. His endgame? Usurp the throne during the chaos, using Lyra's pregnancy as justification for a purifying coup. "He thinks we're weak," she said, eyes blazing. "That love makes us soft. He doesn't understand. It makes us dangerous." Joran grinned, the old soldier waking up inside him. "So what's the play?" They returned not as fugitives, but as hunters. With Talaris's loyalists and a network of disillusioned palace guards, they set a trap during the Festival of Twin Moons, a night when the capital's shields lowered for ceremonial skydances. Zorvak, confident in his victory, prepared to announce Lyra's exile to the assembled dignitaries. But as he stepped onto the central dais, the lights flickered, the doors sealed, and from the balcony above, Joran broadcast Zorvak's own voice, confessing every crime, extracted from a neural recorder planted during a fake peace offering. Chaos erupted. Counselors turned on each other. Zorvak, cornered, activated a hidden phase blade. But Lyra, despite her condition, moved like lightning. She disarmed him with a pressure point strike Joran had taught her during their desert days, then bound him in anti-grav chains. The tribunal, shamed and exposed, had no choice but to reinstate Lyra's title. More than that, they amended the accord on the spot, declaring that love and lineage shall no longer be bound by biology, but by bond. Yet even as victory settled, another twist loomed. Deep in the medical wing, the royal xenobiologist summoned them with urgent news. The baby's cellular structure was accelerating at an unnatural rate. What should have been a 9-month gestation was compressing into weeks. Worse, the child's biosignature was resonating with Varelian hive tech, ancient machines buried beneath the capital that hadn't stirred in millennia. "It's not just growing," the doctor said, eyes wide with awe and fear. It's awakening something. That night, the ground trembled. From the planet's core, a pulse of violet light surged upward, activating dormant spires that rose like crystalline trees through the city streets. The people panicked until the newborn's heartbeat synced with the pulses, harmonizing the energy into a gentle hum. The child wasn't just a hybrid. It was a key. Scholars scrambled through archives, uncovering prophecies of the unifier. A being born of two worlds who would reawaken the world song. A planetary consciousness that had slumbered since the age of fracture. Some hailed the child as a savior, others as a weapon. Lyra went into labor during a solar eclipse. Joran held her hand as the contractions came, harder and faster than any human or Varelian birth on record. Outside, the spires glowed brighter, projecting constellations onto the sky that no astronomer recognized. When the baby finally came, a girl, with skin the soft lavender of dawn and a wisp of snow-white hair, she didn't cry. She sang. A single clear note that made the spires chime in response. The moment was perfect, until the sky split open, not with fire, but with silence. A fleet descended, not of warships, but of sleek, obsidian vessels bearing no insignia. They emitted no signals, no demands, just a pulse that made every electronic device in the capital flicker and die. Then, from the lead ship, a figure emerged on a holographic bridge. Tall, gaunt, with silver eyes and skin the color of void stuff. I am Vale of the Echo Collective. The being intoned, voice echoing in their minds, not ears. We have watched. We have waited. The unifier is ours by right of primordial covenant. Lyra, still weak from birth, stood. She is my daughter, not your relic. Vale tilted its head. You think this is about ownership? The child's song has awakened the old watchers. If unguided, her resonance will unravel space-time. We are the only ones who can teach her to wield it. Joran stepped forward, shielding the newborn in his arms. Then teach us too. Don't take her. Walk with us. Vale studied him, this human who dared to bargain with cosmic entities. For the first time, something like respect flickered in those endless eyes. A trial, then, Vale said. 3 tests, of wisdom, of sacrifice, of unity. Fail, and we take the child. Succeed, and we become your guides. And so, barely recovered from exile, rebellion, and miraculous birth, Joran and Lyra faced their greatest challenge yet. Not with guns or thrones, but with hearts wide open. They traveled to the Edge Nebula, where time bent like reeds in wind, and solved riddles spoken by stars. They gave up memories, Joran his last image of Earth, Lyra her first crown, to feed a dying archive that held the key to balance. And in the final trial, they stood back to back in a collapsing reality, each forced to choose. Save the other or save the child. They chose neither. They chose together. We share one fate, Lyra declared. All or nothing. The Echo Collective fell silent. Then Vale bowed. The bond is true. The path is yours. The fleet departed, leaving behind a single gift. A cradle woven from stardust that would grow with the child, attuned to her every need. Back on Varelia, the spires settled into gentle guardianship, their light now a beacon of hope rather than alarm. The baby, named Serial, meaning Bridge of Dawn, grew quickly, her laughter causing flowers to bloom in winter, her tears calming storms. But Joran knew the universe wasn't done testing them. Whispers came from the outer rim, new factions rising, drawn by the legend of the unifier. Old enemies regrouping, and deep in the archives, a mural was uncovered showing Serial not as a child, but as a woman standing between 2 armies. One human, one Varelian, her hands outstretched, stopping a war before it began. Joran looked at his daughter, then at Lyra, her eyes reflecting the same fear and resolve he felt. They had won battles, toppled tyrants, defied fate. But the real work, the building of a world where their daughter wouldn't have to fight, was just beginning. And this time, they wouldn't do it with medals or mandates. They'd do it with schools instead of barracks, with shared meals instead of border walls, with stories of love that crossed stars. Because the greatest victory wasn't surviving the war. It was making sure the next generation never had to fight one. The years that followed were not quiet, but they were purposeful. Serial's presence rippled through the galaxy like a stone dropped in still water. Her very existence became a symbol, then a catalyst. Human colonies that had once eyed Varelian envoys with suspicion now sent their brightest students to the newly founded Unity Academy on Varelia's moon, where human history was taught alongside Varelian harmonic philosophy, and children of both species played tag among floating gardens and zero-gravity groves. Joran, once a man who'd only known how to break things, now helped build them. He co-designed the Academy's defense curriculum, not to train soldiers but peacekeepers, diplomats who could disarm conflicts with words as deftly as he once did with pulse rifles. Lyra, now regent after her aging father formally stepped aside, pushed sweeping reforms, opening the royal archives, dismantling caste-based trade laws, and establishing the Interspecies Adoption Pact, allowing orphan children of war to find homes across species lines. Serial, now 5 in human years but aging at an accelerated, unpredictable rate, was already reading astrophysics texts and composing symphonies that made the world-spire vines bloom in new colors. She called Joran Papa, in a voice that chimed like tiny bells, and Lyra Amma, the Varelian word for soul mother. She had Joran's stubborn chin, Lyra's luminous eyes, and a gift none could fully explain. She could sense fractures in relationships, in ecosystems, even in space-time itself, and gently mend them with song or touch. But not all fractures could be healed so easily. It began with disappearances. First, a Varelian research vessel studying the Echo Collective's abandoned outposts vanished near the Ghost Belt Nebula. Then, 3 human freighters carrying Unity Academy supplies went dark. No distress calls, no wreckage, just silence. At first, the governments assumed piracy. But the pattern was too precise. Only ships carrying interspecies crews, only those flying under the Unity Accord banner. Worse, survivors from a barely escaped shuttle brought back fragmented memories. Whispers in a language that felt like static in the bones, and a figure, tall, cloaked in shifting shadows, with eyes that flickered between human and Varelian hues. They called him the Unmaker. One survivor rasped before slipping into a coma. Says hybrids are abominations. Says the galaxy must be cleansed. Lyra's blood ran cold. There's an old heresy, she told Joran that night in their private garden, where Serial slept under a canopy of bioluminescent leaves. The purist schism. They believed the Varelian race was meant to evolve alone, untainted. We thought they were extinct after the cleansing wars. They're not extinct, Joran said grimly. They've just been waiting. And they had a new target, Serial. The Unmaker, real name unknown, wasn't just hunting hybrids. He was building an army. Using forbidden bioalchemy, he'd fused captured soldiers with neural parasites that erased identity, leaving only obedience and hatred. His base was rumored to be in the Hollow Core, a dead star system where gravity played tricks on sensors. Joran wanted to go alone. Lyra forbade it. You're not just a soldier anymore, she said, placing a hand on his chest. You're a father. And if you die, you break her heart before she even learns to shield it. So they went together, Joran in tactical gear modified with Varelian stealth tech, Lyra in command armor that hummed with ancestral resonance, and Serial, against all advice, strapped into a reinforced carrier on Lyra's back. She's the key to finding them, Lyra insisted. She can feel their dissonance. The Hollow Core was worse than they imagined. Instead of ruins, they found a living fortress, a grotesque amalgamation of stolen ships, fused together by pulsating organic cables that throbbed like veins. Inside, corridors twisted in impossible geometries, and the air tasted of ozone and decay. Serial whimpered, pressing her tiny hands over her ears. They're screaming inside, she whispered. Even the walls are hurting. They moved silently, disabling parasite-controlled sentries with precision strikes. But the Unmaker was waiting. He stood in the central chamber, a human male once but now altered. His skin shimmered between violet and pale, his white hair streaked with black, his eyes mismatched. One human brown, one Varelian silver. He wasn't a purist zealot. He was a failed experiment, a hybrid like Serial but twisted by rejection and rage. You think your daughter is hope? He sneered, voice layered with static and sorrow. I was born like her. My parents abandoned me. My people called me a mistake. I am the warning. Lyra stepped forward. You didn't have to become this. I had no choice, he roared. The world gave me knives instead of cradles. Joran saw it then, the pain beneath the fury. This wasn't just an enemy. It was a dark mirror of what Serial could become if the galaxy never changed. Instead of firing, Joran lowered his weapon. Then let us give you one. The Unmaker laughed bitterly, until Serial wriggled free and walked toward him, unafraid. Your heart is cracked, she said softly. But not broken. I can help. She reached out. The Unmaker flinched but didn't strike. And in that hesitation, Serial placed her small hand on his chest. A pulse of golden light erupted. Not destructive, not violent, but reparative. The parasite cables recoiled. The mismatched eyes softened. For the first time in decades, the Unmaker, whose birth name was Kivin, remembered what it felt like to be seen, not as a weapon but as a person. The fortress began to collapse as the controlling bionetwork unraveled. They escaped just as the hollow core imploded behind them. Back on Varelia, Kivin stood trial, not as a war criminal but as a patient. Under Serial's quiet guidance and Lyra's mercy, he began the long work of healing, eventually becoming the first counselor at the Interspecies Trauma Institute. Peace returned, but Joran and Lyra knew better than to trust it blindly. So they made a vow: no more medals, no more war brides handed out like trinkets. Instead, they would build a legacy where love wasn't won in battle, but nurtured in classrooms, gardens, and shared kitchens. Serial, now the age of a 10-year-old but with the wisdom of someone far older, stood with them on the balcony of the palace one evening, watching children, human, Varelian, hybrid, play beneath the twin moons. "Will they ever stop fighting?" she asked. Joran put an arm around her. "Maybe not all of them, but we'll keep showing them there's another way." Lyra kissed the top of her head. "And you, little bridge, will show them how to walk it." Far below, laughter rose like music. And for the first time in generations, the future didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like hope. Years melted into decades, and the scars of war faded into stories told by firelight. Joran's hair turned silver, not from stress, but from time well spent. Coaching youth squads at the Unity Academy, rocking grandchildren on his knee, and still stealing quiet walks with Lyra through gardens that bloomed in colors no desert could ever produce. Lyra ruled not as a distant empress, but as a mother of a people, her policies weaving human resilience and Varelian harmony into a new cultural tapestry. Serial, now a calm and radiant woman, became the galaxy's most beloved ambassador. Her voice resolving disputes, her presence calming riots, her very existence proof that differences could create something beautiful, not broken. They built a home not in a palace, but on the edge of the capital, where the dunes met the sky spires. A house with wide windows, a sun-warmed porch, and laughter echoing through every room. Their children and grandchildren, human, Varelian, and blessedly in between, filled it with noise, curiosity, and love. On their 50th anniversary, the entire city lit candles not for ceremony, but for gratitude. Joran held Lyra's hand, her violet skin still soft, her white hair still glowing in the twilight, and whispered, "Best medal I ever won." She smiled, eyes shimmering. "And I got the soldier who didn't know he was already a king." They grew old together, surrounded by peace they'd fought for, built, and passed on. And when they finally lay side by side beneath the twin stars, hands entwined, the universe didn't mourn. It celebrated. For they had done the impossible. Turned a battlefield prize into an eternal promise, and a desert of despair into a garden of joy.